Fire Emblem Three Houses is a game that's made to be pretty ambitious, and it honestly does a lot of things well. One of the aspects that it handles with a good amount of care is a focus on differing perspectives, and how these perspectives can influence opinions, as well as the choices made by characters. With the game offering 4 different routes to pick from, and 3 different lords you can side with, each route offers a different perspective, not only into the second act war, but the larger world of Fodlan as a whole. Fodlan isn't the only area we get insight into, and perspective of as well. Through characters such as Petra, Shamir, Cyril, and Claude, we get to explore the land outside of Fodlan, such as Brigid, Dagda, and Elmira. While it's never too big of a focus, we get to see how these other lands connect to Fodlan, and through these characters we can see some of the general thoughts and mindsets towards Fodlan from those outside. The biggest example of how Three Houses handles perspective, however, has to be regarding the Church of Theros, and how the opinions that characters hold towards the church influences their actions throughout the story. Starting off, Agarthan is clearly against the church. She sees it as responsible for the crest-driven society that they live in, as well as the general suffering of the people of Fodlan. Siding with her, we get to see how she grew to hate the church, and how she sees it as the root of all of Fodlan's problems. Agarthan's war is presented as a righteous cause, in order to free Fodlan from the tyranny of the church. In contrast to that, Dimitri sees the church as necessary for the people to live and survive. Siding with Dimitri is one of the few routes where it ends with Byleth becoming the new archbishop, essentially maintaining the status quo in Fodlan regarding the church and how the church operates. In the dialogue that Dimitri has with Agarthan before the final chapter of the Blue Lion's Path, he tells her people are not strong enough to live without their faith and without their beliefs. This dialogue, and the conversation that they have, showcases a major difference in how they perceive Fodlan, as well as how they perceive the church, and more importantly, how they perceive each other. When Dimitri says Agarthan is strong enough to live without the church, but others aren't, Agarthan is quick to refute this by asking if Dimitri truly sees her as strong. Whereas Dimitri sees Agarthan as a strong person who is trying to change the world to benefit the strong, Agarthan sees herself as a weak person who has had to rise to strength in order to protect the weak such as herself. They both hate the crest-driven system that they are forced to live under. They both hate how the world currently operates, and they both want to protect the weak and end the cycle of the strong trampling the weak. Despite these agreements, however, they are put into conflict with each other because of the fundamental differences in how they view the church and how the church affects Fodlan as a whole. They cannot coexist with each other because in order to create the future that they want, one must change how they view the church, and that is a change that cannot happen. Then you add Claude into the mix of all of this. Claude is an interesting perspective because he's essentially in between Dimitri and Agarthan's viewpoints. While Claude dislikes the church, and he also dislikes people's blind faith in gods, he also sees how the church could be necessary for people to survive. In his route, he works to unite Fodlan without completely dismantling the entire system like Agarthan does, but he also doesn't continue to leave the status quo intact as Dimitri does. Claude presents a nice balance between the two perspectives. Whereas Agarthan and Dimitri are more radical in how they view things, Claude is a nice middle ground, and none of the three are presented as being clearly right or clearly wrong. Similar to showcasing perspectives, Three Houses does well when it comes to creating a sense of moral grayness, and a lot of ambiguity as towards who truly is in the right here. While Agarthan's war is presented as damaging to Fodlan in most of the paths, her route shows the war could be beneficial once it's all over and finished with. The restoration that comes to Fodlan after the war may just be worth the price paid in blood. We learn in Agarthan's path of her shortened lifespan, as well as just how restricted her ability to plan and to act is. Adding these factors into consideration, it's pretty clear her declaring war and attacking the church head-on is basically the only option that Agarthan had left. She couldn't take her time with things, and she did not have time to negotiate or talk it out with Dimitri and Claude. It's also worth noting the themes of change are very present in the Black Eagle students, because they're all trying to fight against or are very heavily affected by the corruption that is rampant in the Empire. Ferdinand and Bernadetta both have power-hungry and corrupt fathers. Petra's journey is about trying to help her land, trying to help her people however she can. Hubert's loyalties lie with Agarthan above anything else, and he is loyal to her in her cause to change the status quo. Caspar is presented as an overshadowed noble, due to the fact that he's so far away from succession, and he also carries the guilt of his family's actions. This is most evident in his supports with Petra. Dorothea believes in commoners being treated the same as nobles, and being given the same opportunities overall. This doesn't just extend to the students either, as Professor Manuela and Professor Hanneman also provide a very interesting look into the Empire and how it affects people. For Manuela, her years as a songstress gave her several connections, and it's what directly led to her position as a teacher at the Academy. She uses this position and her experience in order to help the students that need them most, especially evident with her relationship with Dorothea. Hanneman, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite. He renounced his title and his position in the Empire, instead dedicating himself to crestology. He doesn't believe in the Empire or what it stands for, and instead only wants to pursue science and crests. Finally, there's Yuritsa. And I won't be talking too heavily about Yuritsa because I intend to give him an entire analysis very soon, but his character is built around the suffering of the Empire and how he fights to end that however he can. The common theme woven throughout all of the characters, the students, and the staff is a desire to change, which fits very perfectly with Edelgard's goals and her radicalistic ideals to change Fodlan and improve the world for the better. On the other hand, however, the Blue Lions portray a different story. While the Kingdom of Faerghus is portrayed as a benevolent and peaceful land, going so far as to be called the Holy Kingdom of Faerghus, in truth, the kingdom hides a lot of dark secrets. Rodrigue and Gilbert both showcase a major flaw and a problem in the kingdom society, that being how it places a heavy demand on loyalty towards the crown above all else, including personal needs. When Glenn died, Rodrigue praised his death as one worthy of a true knight. As for Gilbert, when Gilbert felt he had failed the crown in the tragedy of Duscur, he revoked his name, he revoked his land, he revoked his family, and spent the rest of his life trying to atone for his error. Gilbert left his family out of shame, and an internalized belief that his own inability to protect the crown and the king meant he did not deserve to live as the man he once was. He deserved a fate worse than death for having failed his kingdom. Both Rodrigue and Gilbert indicate a major problem in the kingdom society, showcasing the loyalty and devotion to the crown matters more than personal interest or matters. What's interesting is that whereas the Black Eagle students actively attempt to change the status quo in the Empire and fight against the corruption, the majority of the Blue Lion students don't really fight against the status quo of the kingdom, instead just accepting how things are. For example, Ash wants to be a knight because he was inspired by the legends and the stories passed down in the kingdom. He sees knights as righteous figures, and he wants to be one no matter what it costs him. Ingrid similarly wants to be a knight as well, and the way she reacts to Glenn's death and how that affects her is very indicative of how kingdom society has raised her. Along with that, she also has already accepted the fact that she will be in an arranged marriage someday. She's given up her own sense of identity for her family and for her kingdom. Sylvain sees himself as nothing more than a crest. His womanizing ways stem from the belief that women will only ever want him for his crest. He sees himself having little personal value, and instead just sees himself as an extension of his crest. Dedue's loyalty towards Dimitri stems from a very similar mindset, in how Dedue owes everything he has to Dimitri. He no longer sees himself as an individual, but an extension of Dimitri. Mercedes believes that the church and the goddess will protect everyone. She puts blind faith into it. Finally, Dimitri's anger is focused on the tragedy of Duscur, and those responsible for the deaths of many, but he never really acknowledges the internal problems the kingdom holds until near the end of his path. Annette and Felix are really the only ones to ever challenge the status quo of the kingdom. And the reason for that connects back to their fathers, Gilbert and Rodrigue. Annette and Felix have first-hand witnessed the damage that king-worshipping and loyalty to the crown above yourself can do. They've seen the harm that it has on their family, on their fathers, and on their relationships with others, and thus they're the only ones that really fight against this old belief style. The other Blue Lions seem content with how things are, and are nowhere near as radical as the Black Eagle students are. Comparing the Blue Lions with the Black Eagles creates a rather interesting contrast. On the surface, the Empire is filled with corruption and power struggles, but the students are all working to change the system any way they know how to. On the other hand, the kingdom is presented as a peaceful land, and the students are accepting of how things are, despite how damaging and how many flaws it has within. With a contrast this heavy, there's no clear-cut answer towards who's in the right between Edelgard and Dimitri. They have a clash of ideologies based off of the circumstances they've been raised under, the circumstances of the land they live in, and the people surrounding them. Going back to the conversation from the end of the Blue Lions path, they both want to create a better Fodlan. They both want to change the world. Edelgard, however, wants a radically different Fodlan. She wants to destroy the strong. Dimitri, on the other hand, wants to preserve as much of the status quo as he can. He feels it's the only way to protect the weak. While they both want change, their methods and ideologies differ too much to ever work together. This clash of ideologies is a powerful one, and neither one is truly correct, which is what makes Three Houses so interesting to look at. It's a major shame, however, that this level of nuance and depth isn't carried over to the most important aspect of Three Houses. As the title of this video indicates, Fire Emblem Three Houses has a great strength, but that strength is also its greatest flaw. And that's because of how the game tackles those who slither in the dark. Those who slither in the dark are a major missed opportunity, and a wasted potential for so many reasons. Primarily, the game forgets about them for the majority of the time. In the 4 routes that the game offers you, they're only of major importance in a single route, that being Claude's route. In the Black Eagles route, they're mentioned as being Edelgard's temporary ally, but we never deal with them personally. That instead happens off-screen in an epilogue. In the Blue Lions route, they're very loosely mentioned, and mostly implied. Even though they're the ones behind the tragedy of Duscur, Dimitri never gets a chance to confront them directly, instead only indirectly killing Thales while he was in disguise as Lord Arundel. In the Church route, they're very briefly reintroduced near the end, but they get taken care of rather quickly and aren't a major focus, despite the fact that the Church route would be the best route to address them, aside from perhaps including them more in the Black Eagles route. The Golden Deer route is the only route to fully focus on those who sit in the dark, and it gives them a backstory. Unfortunately, that backstory is a major flaw, and it breaks the fundamental structure the game has. The reason for this is because the backstory we are given, and the way the backstory is presented to us, breaks the themes that Three Houses is trying to convey. It destroys the focus on perspective, morality, and nuance that is prevalent in the rest of the game. The backstory for those who sit in the dark, as well as the backstory for their race, the Agarthans, is given to us in the Golden Deer route by Rhea. This is a problem for many reasons. First of all, Rhea is a very biased source. While the story she tells is a first-hand account of the Red Canyon slaughter, as well as the subsequent war, she is still heavily biased, being the daughter of Sothis. While the game presents her story as being a fact, all of the events that she describes and explains are all being filtered through her perspective, through her own bias. Aside from being biased, there's also the fact that the game has not established any reason at all to trust Rhea with this backstory. It is a given fact that Rhea has secrets. She lies, she hides things. She lied about the history of Foden. She revised the story of the Crests and the story of Nemesis to fit her own needs. She's been manipulating the masses for generations. She conducted experiments in order to try and revive Sothis, and she kept this hidden from everyone, including Sedeth, who is not only her most trusted advisor, but someone who knows the truth about Rhea personally. Despite the game telling us several times that Rhea is not someone who should be trusted at face value, when it comes to the Agarthans, suddenly her word becomes an objective fact, and it's not something that should be questioned. This is a blatant contradiction of the story's themes, because we don't get any insight or any perspective into the Agarthan side of these events. There's nothing gray about it either, as the Agarthans are evil and Sothis is good. It's presented that way blankly. Perhaps Intelligence Systems was trying to subvert player expectations by making the Church and Rhea the good guys in the end, but by doing that, they ultimately just ended up playing into their own standard tropes, because now we get a generic Dragon God good, Evil Cult bad story. While those who sit in the dark may be evil themselves, I feel it's unfair to paint all Agarthans as evil simply because Rhea's backstory says so. Rhea herself isn't even all that different from those who sit in the dark. They both scheme behind the shadows in order to influence Fodlan for their own benefits. They both manipulate people to get what they want. They both lie and hide. For people who are supposed to be seen as good or bad, the methods they utilize aren't that distinct, and there should be some grayness to this, but there isn't at all. What's even more confusing is that the Cindered Shadows DLC didn't even attempt to fix this at all. They could have easily rectified this mistake by introducing one of the 4 new characters as an Agarthan. The DLC focuses heavily on individuals who have been shunned by the Church and locked away, so having an Agarthan there would make perfect sense. It would also play into showcasing how Rhea's own biases are influencing her retelling of events, by having not only an Agarthan perspective, but also by showcasing Rhea's treatment of the Agarthan people. Fire Emblem games typically let us play as at least one of the enemy army soldiers, in order to get a view into how things are on the other side of the war, in order to offer even a slight amount of perspective. In Three Houses, however, we don't get any of that, instead only focusing on the other students and the teachers. While technically recruiting a student from another class could count as recruiting an enemy soldier once we hit the war phase, that's honestly very weak, and it just doesn't replace what could have been an interesting perspective in recruiting an Agarthan or a former member of those who sit in the dark into our armies. Apparently, there's a data mined Agarthan crest in the game file. Perhaps this was meant only for enemy units, but if a recruitable and playable Agarthan was planned at some point, I hope we can get more DLC in the future to add them into the story, as that would add more nuance, more perspective, and more morality into an area that is severely lacking in it. Those who sit in the dark are ultimately the biggest wasted potential that Three Houses have. And the reason for that is because it just breaks the story that the game is trying to tell, and crushes the themes that it conveys perfectly in every other route. Before I end the video, I want to give a huge shout out to a special friend of mine, Dove, for helping me with the inspiration for this video. You can find her on Twitter at DodoMandias. I hope I pronounced that correctly, if not, I'm sorry. On her Twitter, you'll find her talking about Three Houses occasionally, and she has very interesting opinions. Among several other great things that you'll find on her Twitter, she's talked quite a bit about the Agarthans and those who slither in the dark, or as she lovingly likes to refer to them as, the, quote, dubstep cult. She makes a lot of valid points, and is a very interesting person in general, with some great opinions. I've barely began to scratch the surface of why those who slither in the dark are underutilized potential compared to everything that she has to say. And it's all very well done, so I highly recommend checking her out. We talked a few times on Discord before the making of this video, and a lot of the points that I brought up are things that we talked about, so I really want to thank you a lot for that. I also want to recommend a fanfiction that she's currently writing called Fire Emblem Three Houses, The Obsidian Eclipse, or OE for short. The story is essentially a fifth route to Fire Emblem Three Houses, and it offers the Agarthan perspective that was severely lacking in the game itself. I'm normally not too big on fanfiction myself, but her story is enjoyable, it's a good take on the characters, it offers interesting ideas, and it's filled with a lot of passion for the game. I love to support my friends, so go check it out. If you liked this video, then I'm sure you'll like her stuff. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all next time.